The ideas expressed in City Club forums are those of the speakers and not of the City Club of Cleveland, IdeaStream Public Media, or their sponsors. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. Today is Thursday, August 7th. My name is Dan Moulthrop. I'm the Chief Executive here. I'm really excited about our conversation today. It's a look at a truly unique nonprofit news organization, the Marshall Project. And we're going to talk about how it has carved a very particular role for itself in working exclusively on the criminal justice system. 11 years ago, the founder of the Marshall Project came to speak at the City Club. Neil Barsky had been a journalist early in his career, working for the New York Daily News and then the Wall Street Journal. And then he started a career in finance. He left all that truth-seeking behind and ultimately ran a hedge fund. But in 2009, he returned to journalism, founding the Marshall Project to, as he described it, to try to create a sense of urgency about issues in the criminal justice system, issues that we'd all grown a little too accustomed to. Named for the legendary jurist Thurgood Marshall, the project launched in 2014 with a goal of sparking a national conversation about criminal justice. And after a couple of Pulitzers and a Peabody, the Marshall Project established its first local newsroom here in Cleveland, Ohio in 2022. That newsroom started off with pieces on police accountability, Cleveland's consent decree, and an explainer on how youth wind up in adult courts. The model grew, and the following year, local newsrooms were added in Jackson, Mississippi, and St. Louis, Missouri. And when you look through the stories that they've covered over the years and in each of these localities, what you see again and again are government entities failing to live up to the promise of justice, failing to live up to our society's commitment to the essential humanity that we all share, regardless of which side of the justice system we're on. So today, as thousands of journalists are here in Cleveland for the annual conference of the National Association of Black Journalists, we'll have a conversation with national and local leadership from the Marshall Project about the work that they're doing and the work ahead. Joining us on stage, Mark Puente. He's the investigative reporter with Marshall Project Cleveland. Next to him is Phil Trexler, editor-in-chief of the Marshall Project Cleveland. And next to him is Marlon Walker, Phil's boss. Marlon is in charge of all of the local news efforts for the Marshall Project. Quick mention, too, that today's forum is our annual WCLV forum named by Robert and Jean Conrad. Robert, of course, is a giant in local broadcast media, and we deeply appreciate his commitment to quality news and information. A reminder for our audience, too, if you have a question during the Q&A portion, you can text that question to 330-541-5794, and we'll work it into the program. And members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming the Marshall Project. So I want to start off with the origin story. I told the origin story of the Marshall Project itself, but I want to get more into the origin of Marshall Project Cleveland. Marlon Walker, how did Cleveland come to be the first local newsroom for the Marshall Project?
So our first foray into the Cleveland community was Testify, a series that went into a lot of different things about the court system here in Cuyahoga County. From there, it was almost using that as an opportunity to jump off into what local newsrooms could look like and what local impact could look like. Local impact is probably the most swift of how to best be, an example and to hold people accountable in communities. And so, philanthropic need and desires also dictated that a lot of local newsrooms, community-driven news, were going to be the latest wave when we were in the middle of a pandemic. And so the Marshall Project decided to pivot and add local news to its resume, so to speak. So in 2021, deep into the work on Testify, our leadership at the time started conversations in Cleveland on how to local how to find ourselves in communities. And it was a lot of people who had come from national newsroom backgrounds and didn't really have an understanding of what the needs could be and what the impact could be. And so that's how I found myself, in a conversation with 6 people from the Marshall Project in late 2021 to really talk about what local could be. And the rest is sort of history. But, Cleveland had already been planned before I started in February of 2022. And it was really just to start with a guidepost of what this looked like and how it could look. The initial plan was 5 newsrooms over 5 years.
And you're at 3.
Yeah, we're at 3, and we're taking a break this year because 3 was a lot.
Yeah.
And, and excuse my emotional support towel, but
It's all right.
it's an opportunity to really take a step back and look at the 3 newsrooms we have. We opened St. Louis, in January, and to really look at what we've done to this point, how we can do it better, how we continue to do what works well for us, and to continue, to just have the conversations about whether we move forward. But we're also in a transition in leadership, and so it's a good opportunity to take that step.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to something you said. You thought a lot in 2021 about what local could be and how to local. What did you imagine local could be then, and how is that different from what has manifested?
I built my career in local newsrooms. And so, you have a lot of people like NABJ around the corner is something that's really cultivated my career. You walk into a job fair full of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, but also, the Louisville Courier-Journal, the Detroit Free Press, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and really deciding where you want to be and the type of work you want to do. That was always local for me. And so it's been an opportunity to bring my expertise into a national news organization and say, this is the difference. This is what it looks like when you sit in a community and you talk to people and you learn the concerns and you write the stories based off of those concerns and you follow up on those concerns until somebody does something to make it different.
Mm-hmm. Mark Puente, I want to turn to you. I've known you for about 20 years, known your work first, I guess, and then have known you as a colleague from when I practiced journalism as well. I understood you as a very traditional, hard-nosed journalist in a competitive news environment, and not somebody who I had imagined would move to a nonprofit project. And as I recall, you left journalism to smoke meat, and then came back to journalism for this project. So what has that been like for you to go from traditional journalism, traditional local investigative journalism, to this kind of? Marlon, you got something you want to add in?
Before he even starts,
Yeah.
tell him to talk about how you turned it down at first.
Yeah.
I told him to get lost.
You did.
I was busy.
Yeah. So talk about what drew you back, how you came back, and how you found it different than how you used to practice journalism.
I told our former editor-in-chief I had no interest in it when she came to town to see if I would apply. I said, I'm busy smoking meat, making tacos, and doing healthcare. But what made me jump back in was I was at a CMSD a media event over on the east side, and I was surprised by the questions from the CMSD students on the depth of reporting that I did 15 years ago. And that day I said to myself, why am I not back doing this? And that happened to coincide the day that the Marshall Project launched or opened up their application portal. So at 9 o'clock at night, I applied, and it worked out. But
They took a flyer on you, an untested talent.
they did, so it worked out for everybody.
For those that don't remember, it's worth, or that may have missed this part of local history, Mark Puente's reporting when he was at the Plain Dealer was largely responsible for the end of Gerald McFall's career when he was sheriff for decades, literally decades, and was critically important in uncovering the corruption inside of Cuyahoga County involving Jimmy DeMore and Frank Russo and others.
I'll take credit for McFall, but there's other reporters in this room right now who played a large role, and it was a team effort. So.
Yes. Yeah.
But to go back to your question on nonprofit, I was a bit skeptical, worried about funders, and there hasn't been any issues. There's a fine line and a wall. But for me, it's radically different now with the collaboration in town. Because 15 years ago when I left the Plain Dealer, when I left the LA Times 5 years ago, I would have never dreamed of calling another news outlet and talking to a reporter and saying, here's what I got, here's what we can get, do you got any sources or ideas? And I'm giving them everything that I could report. So that's been the hardest thing to get used to, but it works for this model.
Phil Trexler, you also came at this from this is a very new model, right? So nobody had really a lot of experience with this model. Talk about how it appeared to you at first, and how you have, sort of changed, how it's changed how you work.
Mm-hmm. And I think for some of the folks in the audience who don't understand or aren't familiar with our business model, we do a lot of partnership work with other media in town. We didn't come to Cleveland to compete with the Plain Dealer or with News 5. We came here to supplement the work that other folks are doing. So a lot of that is collaborating, like Mark says, picking up the phone, talking to another reporter at Channel 5 or at IdeaStream, and working together on a story. And that takes some getting used to, because like Mark, I came from a background as a competitive journalist, working at the Beacon Journal for 16 years and at the WKYC for 7. It was an ultra-competitive environment where you want to scoop the competitors, and you want to get the story first and get it right and get it best. So, it took some buy-in to get used to it. But the value there is just incredible, because it elevates our work, it elevates our partners' work, but at the end of the day, it informs more people. Mm-hmm. And that's the goal of our organization, is to deliver impact on the criminal justice system.
Phil Trexler, would you talk a little bit about how about coming up with story ideas, like how that's different as well than kind of the traditional mode?
Yeah, we don't do daily stories. We take deep investigative looks. When I started the Beacon Journal, back in '98, there were 200 people in the newsroom. We had this group of veteran reporters on our investigative team who sat in the corner, and they were the big shots in the newsroom. And we weren't, they would stop talking when you'd walk by their desk, and they were all secretive and stuff. And it's like, okay, I get it. Well, when they started doing all the cutbacks, those big shots all either left, got new jobs, or had to move into the city desk to do the daily reporting that we did. So that created this void of investigative journalism, and that's happened in newsrooms everywhere. So we come to town, we're going to take up that expensive proposition of developing long-term investigative stories that can deliver change. And that's the challenge that we put out.
And to be clear, it's expensive because you're paying a full-time salary for somebody who might take a month or
exactly.
longer.
That's what happened, in other papers, is you can't hire somebody and then have them do 3 or 4 or 5, 6 stories a year. You need somebody producing content every single day. So having that investigative team was a luxury that traditional news organizations can no longer afford.
Marlon, another piece of the model, though, is that stories are generated directly out of community interest, and not out of some concept or perception of community interest, but out of actual time spent listening to community members.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a little bit of the behind the scenes of what we do to put together these newsrooms. The first 90 days or so is really spent talking to people. I think a lot of people fail to realize, especially us as a new organization, you have to build trust. It's not that we're doing the regular daily due diligence, but we're looking at stories that, sometimes if you ask for public records, you may not get those records. And so that means you need to know somebody in an organization who deems you worthy of what you should be able to get because of what the state's laws dictate. And so that 40% of the work that really goes unnoticed is something that we're very intentional about. We're making sure that we're contributing unique stories to the landscape. Because again, like Phil said, my thing with every local is that we want to be additive and not competitive. Like, I see this as the biggest newsroom I'll ever work in, because not only do I get to work with Phil and Mark, I get to work with the folks at IdeaStream. I get to work with the folks at the Cleveland Scene. I get to work with the folks at the Akron Beacon Journal. And so those are all, for me, like the folks who would typically be on the other side of the room, the conversations you would drop in on. And so we're spending a lot of time taking the thoughtful approach and making sure that we're giving you something not only that you could be confident in, but it takes a ton of time.
Mm-hmm. I want to just run through a list of just a few of the stories and topics you guys have covered since 2022, and this is in no particular order. There's been bail reform, there's been coverage of the plans for the new jail, there's been really impressive coverage and important coverage about what happens when people die in jail, coverage about license suspensions and how you get your license back, coverage about perceived racism and policing practices in Bracknell. Did I mention bail reform? Did I mention Judge Celebrezze? I don't think I did. There's body cam footage that's now available within 7 days through the Sheriff's Department, which hadn't previously been available. Access to light, to natural light in the jails. This is just a few of the stories that
Juveniles.
What's that?
The juvenile judge and the juvenile appointed counsel story.
And underqualified attorneys representing youth in our system, whether or not they're being bound over to the adult system. Mark Puente, of all of these stories, these are not all your byline, but what has been most important for you? Which of these stories has been kind of most significant for you, or do you feel like sort of has had the greatest impact?
For me, I would say the license suspension story. While the stories on Judge Celebrezze seem to be getting more attention, that's impacting a smaller pool. The license suspension story has touched hundreds of thousands of drivers in Ohio who had to go to court to pay fines and suspensions related from missing court fines or not paying fines. It was ridiculous. You'd walk into Cleveland Heights Court and you literally see people lined up like they're at a military chow hall being talked to like they're dirt by a court bailiff, and it's just ushering black and brown people through there. It was a cycle of money, and that paid it. We fought for months and months to get records from the state. We published the story, and at that same time, two lawmakers were crafting a bill. Once they seen our story, they threw away their bill and kind of made their bill match our story. So there's been some positive change for people in every part of Ohio, including the workforce, because that was the theme that the bipartisan lawmakers down there realized. Workforce can't get to work, and they're going to keep getting stopped in suspensions. It's never going to go away. So that is the most gratifying.
Mm-hmm. Marlon Walker, was that story a model for St. Louis and Jackson?
You know, I wouldn't say that the story was a model. Mm-hmm. I would say that there are parts of Cleveland that have become a model for every newsroom that we've opened since then. Like, Mark can be as humble as he wants to be, but I think about the Celebrezze stories because that was not your typical story from the Marshall Project.
Can we pause for a moment? Mark, can you just summarize in like 30 seconds the Celebrezze story?
Longtime judge appointing her friend to manage complex divorce cases. He has in turn racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees. It all flew under the radar. There's no record keeping. There's no easy way to find it until we exposed it.
And the upshot?
The upshot is she's now facing possibly a 2-year suspension from the Supreme Court. That's ongoing now.
I'd like to add an addendum to that. You all have heard these stories in the past. Plain Dealer's done stories, Scene's done stories. They've been always a one and done type of investigation, pointing it out and then moving on to the next thing. Mark's efforts have been relentless for 2 years. He didn't just drop in, do a story, and move on to the next one. And that's the difference, and that's the important value that we bring, is that we don't quit after one story. Mark recognizes the fact that you have to continually go and beat and keep digging, and more tips come in, and that is how you generate effective change.
Marlon.
We often do stories through the lens of the issue. And this was a story, and I remember when this came about because, you know, Mark and I will have quick conversations when he gets onto something, and it's just a quick fly through of, hey, this is going on, this is what it looks like. But this one was a little bit more, I'm trying to think of how I can say this because who knows if the bosses are listening, but this was a story that wasn't typically the Marshall Project. This was, and again, like I said, and I mention this in every group channel that we're in. This is why we local. There are stories that are very specific to communities that, once done, will show you the why. It's like there's a bigger story here in judicial oversight and misconduct, so on and so forth. But it's all through the lens of this woman and her relationship with this receiver. And, you know, Mark can say, but I feel like, you know, without risking the paycheck, I'll say this was a story that we had to fight for.
Well, and just to, can you explain a little bit why it wasn't a typical Marshall Project story?
Because it seemed to affect one person. And like I said, eventually, once...
You mean one person being the judge?
Yes.
It also ostensibly had an impact on the couples who were being divorced, who were getting divorced in her
But it's
courtroom.
not criminal justice necessarily.
Yeah, but it's not criminal justice. It's a civil thing.
Yeah.
And it's less that. There is some, you know, some justice elements, but I think it's more the subject matter became, well, you know, what's the impact it's going to be? And it's like, you never know, but there's a reason Mark's still working on this story 2 years later. And so that's the combination of that story and the impact from license suspensions and the due diligence in Bracknell. Those are the type of things that you look for when you start thinking about the next newsroom. How are our conversations with the community at large going to factor into the type of stories that we find?
I feel like what you're saying about the celebrity story is that it's actually a story about a lack of judicial oversight, which would imply that there are more stories. We have more than 30 Cuyahoga County courtrooms in the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas system. Mark, do you think there might be more stories there?
Well, Dan, I would suggest follow our website and our partner's website, and you'll see stuff someday.
Okay.
You said I'm relentless. I'm still knocking on doors.
Uh-huh.
And people are calling.
Folks are welcome also afterwards to offer tips or anything like that tomorrow. And not like financial tips. I mean like news and information type tips.
Financial tips are welcome
Financial tips are welcome, but those are actually tax-deductible contributions to the Marshall Project. Phil Trexler, talk a little bit about the importance of the focus on youth.
I think everybody's familiar with the critical position we find ourselves in with our juvenile justice system. We rank number one in some categories that are not necessarily ones that we are happy to be ranked so high. Doug Livingston, our reporter, has been doing a lot of reporting on the juvenile justice system, taking a look last year at who's being appointed, how often they're being appointed, exploring is there a pay-to-play system there, because Doug's reporting and data analysis has found that a few handful of attorneys are getting the bulk of the cases. But taking that even further, they delved into not only who these people are, but also to the qualifications. Attorneys also have to have CLE credits in order to perform take certain cases in the court. And because of Doug and Rachel DeSelle's reporting, there were changes made in the process, and to make sure that everybody is qualified and that the kids who are appointed these attorneys are getting the best representation that they can. So I think that's vital for our youth, because we're in a critical stage here in Cuyahoga County, and the youth are our future, and we owe it to them and their families to provide them a fair shake in court.
The explainer on bindovers, and the criminal justice system is full of these sorts of terms like bindover, receiver, things that you never know, you don't know what they mean until you're actually involved in the system.
Yeah.
How important are these explainers?
I think they're vital to it. And again, to Doug Livingston's credit, it's become kind of a common thing for us now. He did a story on the Reagan-Tokes law, which can be really complicated for folks who are, whose time is precious. So, we did an explainer saying, okay, this is the Reagan-Tokes law. This is what,
What is
how it works.
What is it?
And the Reagan
Please.
Tokes law. Yeah, ask Doug. No, it's one of those things that get tough on crime and keep people in prison longer. And Doug's analysis found that prison terms are not being they're supposed to have two prongs. There's a carrot and stick, and Doug's reporting found that there's more stick and never any carrots. Guys are staying in prison longer, and the system is becoming worse off for it. Not only for the folks behind bars, but for the people who work there. So it's not working out very well as designed, and he pointed out in his reporting some flaws with the statute that's not working.
Marlon, I want to ask you a question that you might not be able to answer. This project in Cleveland was made possible by certain funders. We talked before, the Fowler Family Foundation, the Nord Family Foundation, the Gunn Foundation, the George Gunn Foundation, who were investing in an idea, an unproven idea. What have you heard back from funders about how successful they feel you've been?
I think a lot of people are excited about the impact that we're seeing. I think people are excited about the nature of the stories. There have been a couple stories that were no-brainers that really sought to go a step further and talk about the deeper meanings or what was really behind those data points that we were able to dig up for many of those reasons. And of course, I'm thinking about Siobhan Carroll, our Chief Development Officer in the back. Like Phil said, she can answer those questions. But it's really exciting to hear from folks what we're doing, having lasting impact. And I think that hopefully, translates to money well spent. Outside of Cleveland, it's the same thing. We're hearing people talk about the immediate investment and the impact that they're seeing from the stories in Cleveland, Jackson, St. Louis, and the additive nature. Again, I use the word additive probably too much, but we're talking about stories and we're talking about subjects that a lot of newsrooms have just found themselves unable to get to when they've been decimated because of advertising or whatever the revenue loss was that we've tried to, stand in the gap for.
I want to get to questions from all of you in a second, but one last question, Phil. Talk about a story that you had to give up on, that the newsroom just couldn't get traction on despite efforts. Despite your best
I don't want to
efforts.
start any fights up here because there's been some really animated discussions about some story pitches that just didn't go. But you ask a cold question like that, I can't think of any. Besides that one, I'm not even.
I was thinking about the efforts that you all put into scraping the sentencing database and the challenges that you had with that. And
yeah, whenever you take on the government, you have to have really, really, really deep pockets because hiring attorneys and pursuing legal action against the government is a very expensive proposition, and the government knows it, and they will play the long game, and they will wait you out. They do it constantly. So our intent was to scrape the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court docket, but with computer, the data people will explain it to you. But in other words, gather the information on there so we can digest it, so we can better understand who's getting sentenced, how long are these sentences fair, are they equal, who's the hanging judge, who's the soft judge, all that. So we got resistance from the court. They don't want to provide that information. They say they don't have to, but we say we're going to sue you. So that's where we're at. But your legal expenses can grow quickly, and it's a very, very expensive process.
And Phil, as you said to me on the call, sometimes you actually don't want.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is I've been on many cases, and I had a great attorney at the Beacon Journal who said, be careful what you sue for because you may not like the answer. And there are countless examples out there now. The Cincinnati Enquirer suing Pike County was a really bad case for journalism because it set us back, and now you're seeing in the State House, there's efforts there just recently with the recent budget bill where they're slowly slashing away at the public records laws. I know most folks don't understand that or appreciate it, but 90% of journalism is public records, and your State House is working to take away our ability to access a lot of records. I mean, now, instead of a criminal case when it's settled or resolved, instead of getting those records the next day, we have to wait a year at least to get that information. And that's somebody's life who's hanging in the balance for 12 months, while appeals get exhausted. So, yeah.
Phil Trexler is the editor-in-chief of the Marshall Project Cleveland. Mark Puente is an investigative reporter there, and Marlon Walker is the managing editor for all local initiatives with the Marshall Project. We're going to move to the audience Q&A right now. Super excited that Justice Donnelly is going to do the first question. We do welcome questions from everyone, whether or not you've ever sat on the bench, including members and guests, and those joining us via our live stream at cityclub.org. If you'd like to text a question, you can text it to 330-541-5794, and we'll work it into the program. Your Honor.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, and thank you for the important work you're doing here in Cleveland. I think it's great. I want to talk about a subject that you just ended with. I've been the most vocal advocate for collecting sentencing data in the state of Ohio. And for those that don't practice in criminal law in the state of Ohio, I'm going to tell you what every practitioner knows. Because of the lack of data and our antiquated sentencing laws, it's possible to go into one judge's courtroom, have the lawyers advocate for a sentence, wind up with an outcome of probation, and you can take those same lawyers and the same facts, walk them 15 feet across the hall, and get an outcome of 20, 30, 40 years in prison. This is the roulette wheel in the arraignment room that takes place. And there's data that you don't have to take my word for it. So what the public does not know about, and I know about, is that there's a standing order that exists that was issued by the Common Pleas Court by the administrative judge when I was there. And it's in the clerk's office. And they believe that they have to operate under it. And it says that if public records are requested that belong to the public, you are not to give them out. You are ordered not to give them out unless the judges are told first and they get to vote on it separately. And that's been over 10 years, not the present administrative judge or the one before him. Have you taken any steps to challenge that? Do you have the legal resources to challenge the constitutionality of an order that does not allow the release of public records that belong to the public and should be there?
I think, as we've talked about, it's an expensive proposition. I mean, it really is. I mean, to fight that all the way, it will cost tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to pursue it.
Be able to do that pro bono, but this is what's on the line.
Yeah.
Everybody, this is democracy, and the Fourth Estate is a very important institution that is the watchdog of our courts, and it's necessary for you to be there. And this is a story that's too important to let go. I mean, this disparity in sentencing, racial and otherwise, is the biggest threat to public confidence, in my opinion, to the court system. And until it's fixed.
I agree. And I think the resistance.
Thank you, Justice.
I think the resistance that we face, that the public faces from our own elected judges who fought against compiling that information, as you're aware. There were efforts being made to have our judges report their sentencing information. That was met with great resistance. And that's unfortunate. But the only recourse we have is to litigate. So that's.
Go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Pat Dillard, and I have a question about central booking in Cuyahoga County. As you know, the Marshall Project has done an article about this already, maybe more than one. And what we are facing right now is there really has been no change. The latest is that people may be kept in jail for 12 days before any charges are brought against them. They haven't been proven guilty. They could be eligible for immediate release, and yet they're sitting in jail, and their whole life can fall apart in 12 days in jail, including their jobs and everything else in their lives. So I wanted to know, what can the Marshall Project do in the future to help to get this moving, to get more data out, to find out what are the pressure points, what needs to be done to get this living up to its promise 3 years ago when we poured millions and millions of dollars into this.
I want to jump in, and I think the biggest thing is awareness, because what you just said, I wonder how many people in the room even knew that was the thing.
How many people knew? Very small
And that's
number.
where we start.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that figure, that 12-day figure, that's an, I'm sorry, Pat, where are you? Is that the average?
The max.
I see. Okay, thank you. That's a very long time. That doesn't seem like a speedy trial. No, you guys don't want to talk about this.
I think, in my mind, I think it's one of the examples where I don't know that we can be additive, because I will commend the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com for the efforts on the reporting that they've done in that story. So I don't know that we can be additive to that. Their reporting has been very extensive on it. So if there's a lane for us to take and exploit and explore, we will.
I would add to her point on getting more data from the county. As someone who's fought the county daily to get data, any person in Cuyahoga County who believes in good government should be yelling at the county executive administration, because they are playing games with records. They're slow walking records. My colleague and I, Doug, and our other colleague, Brittany, we're taking over a year to get simple investigative files on anything. I've never seen it this bad. It's terrible.
Hi.
How's it going? Matthew On from the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. I think one of the things I notice in Marshall Project coverage that differs from traditional news sources here is the narrative and the wording choices that I think it makes in terms of how it talks about the criminal legal system. For example, right, traditional local news will talk about a statutory maximum, won't actually talk about an actual sentence or even the average sentence that somebody receives. And I know that the Marshall Project does partner with other local news organizations in the area, and I'm curious what intentional efforts or conversations there have been with those organizations about the way that they cover the criminal justice system and the narrative choices that they make and don't make to include or not include certain facts and words.
Well, you know, we've created a style guide that works on several different fronts to make sure that we are inclusive in the thinking of people who find themselves justice affected, but also in using as a guide for other organizations who cover criminal justice. We've done a project on language in general that talks about how you refer to people who are incarcerated, how you infer to things that are related to the system. And it's really our opportunity to, you know, like most journalists know, there's an Associated Press style book that is, you know, sort of the main guide for how you write stories, how you dictate things. And so we try to be, again, the word additive. We try to add, you know, a little extra to the pot where we can be, you know, and kind of lean on our own expertise and the conversations that we're having with people who have found themselves affected in some way, shape, or form. And that guide is being used by countless organizations, and some of our partners use it every day in their own reporting.
Mark, you're the one who's doing the actual collaborating with Channel 5 News or whomever. How has that, have you had those conversations around specific language?
Yeah, I mean, we don't use the word inmates, incarcerated, but I think as time has evolved since 2020, other outlets have recognized the need to get away from that load of language, and we don't have to tell them they're doing it, so we're all on the same page, but there is a learning curve when you guys do partner up on bringing two organizations together, operating under two different guides, I guess, or standards.
Mm-hmm. Do you have, is there, on the Marshall Project website, is the style guide there?
Yeah.
So anybody can use it. We can use it. Awesome. Great. Hey, Nina.
So we all know that it's very hard for voters to know which judges, what their records are, and who to vote for. So I had heard that the Marshall Project was going to release information that would be helpful. Now, I understand that you can't get sentencing data, but are there other ways that you can help inform voters?
Yeah, we do. We partnered with Cleveland's Signal Cleveland to produce a judge guide. Came out in 2023. In this collaboration, we compiled a lot of data about the folks who are running for judge, not only running but also on the bench at the time. It's designed to be something different than a voting guide that's already been out there by different organizations. And I kind of always equated it to being like a baseball card where you get to know a little bit of details about the judges and who's seeking office. So you can go to our website or Signal Cleveland to find the judge guide.
Will you be doing that again for the next round of judicial elections?
So there's an update that's coming. Signal Cleveland will be leading the charge on that, but we will be co-publishing it with them.
Great.
This is a follow-up to Justice Donnelly's question about collecting data from the Common Pleas Court. We elect our judges. They're all elected. And maybe I'm naive, but I think there is power to the pen. Because the judges are elected and they've been not cooperative with you in releasing data, have you considered using the power of the pen to identify judges who always seek re-election to let the community know where the problem is in revealing that information? I'm very dismayed by the idea that it costs a lot of legal fees to get this information. I mean, these are elected officials. They run for office. It should be public information as far as I'm concerned. Have you considered using the power of the pen to identify these judges who want to be re-elected by us?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, Jan, I think it's a great idea, and it's still, like a lot of things, it's a complex situation because a lot of the judges are going to be vague about. I mean, when they sentence somebody, it's a public record. So it's really hard for me to put my arms around the fact that we can't compile public records into one bucket and then to digest it. So yeah, I appreciate the question, and yeah, I think it's a great idea to pursue something like that in some fashion. And we've done that in the past. Other media have done that in the past when this issue came to a head back in 22, 23, and I think Justice O'Connor was recommending this to happen, and there was met with resistance by some folks over at the Common Pleas Court. And to this day, you still have that resistance. And the judges who resisted spoke publicly about why. And I don't, and that goes to the point, though, that one of the things, I think the most crucial thing in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, one of the most crucial problems we're facing is voter turnout. And I think it's very discouraging when you see 20, 30, 40% turnout, and we got to do better than that. And when you don't, this is what happens. So.
Phil, what's the justification for not the judges offer when you say they said why?
They feel that the numbers would be spun and that every case is different and judges have different interpretations and there are some variables that aren't accounted for when it comes to sentencing. But at least give folks a chance to do the math and to figure it out. That's all. That's all we're asking.
That information about which judges are willing to share data and which aren't is something that seems like could be easily compiled on your baseball card.
You could do it on a survey. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Josephine Bullock. I'm a high school student who's looking into journalism as a career. So first, thank you for being here to speak today. My question goes back to what you were saying about language evolving since 2020. With the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, especially George Floyd, and the use of social media, especially among young people in my generation, how have you seen investigative journalism kind of change as a field and how people use journalism and social media to further the spread of information, especially locally?
Go ahead.
A lot of old people on the stage. I'm just
Oh, no.
cognizant of that right now.
As a millennial, no. And thank you for the question. I think one thing that, and sometimes to my detriment, I try to reinforce with our teams is that you can't tell a story the same way. And not the way you package it, but really, everybody's not reading 2,500 words. And so we've seen advances in house of how we tell these stories, using TikTok as a platform, making sure that we are including more graphics, being more visually and aesthetically pleasing, to keep people long. Most stories on our site average around 2 minutes of engagement time. You get through 2 minutes of a story in about 600 words. So again, if our average story is somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 words, they're really not touching on a lot of the work that you've done in that space. And so we've tried to find ways, and I'm on this crusade right now to work with local influencers in the communities that we find ourselves in to really sort of reinforce the story to an audience that we haven't been able to reach. Because again, we talk about meeting people where they are, but if we're gonna continue to just run up against the wall with 2,500 words here and there, then we fail ourselves because we're putting so much work into these stories. And if we're not getting it in front of the people who need it, the people who can be empowered by the work that we're doing to focus on the system, then we fail as well. So there's a lot being done. I think there's a lot more opportunity, but really trying to key in on what people's needs and desires are when it comes to the work that we do. Criminal justice is important, but it's very tough.
So are you saying that you'd be open to collaborating with local TikTok content creators in the same way you're collaborating with Channel 5 News?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I am a former journalist. I'm at Cleveland State Law School now, and I just want to thank you all. I know it's a really thankless job. It's underpaid, and I just heard on NPR the other day, I think it's right now we just have a dearth of local journalists and people leaving the industry, myself included. So there's definitely the journalism guilt attached there. But curious what you guys all think is kind of one of the biggest challenges facing the industry in terms of recruiting people, and what we can do to get folks on the ground.
I think you should answer that, Marlon, since you hire everybody.
I personally have tried to, in the process of recruiting, look at people for what they can become and also pay them based off of what they can become. I think a lot of news organizations, and I say this as someone who started out, 20 years ago this week at the St. Pete Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times, for $35,000. That was good money for me at 23, 24, but you can't pay someone $35,000 with a college degree, and the cost of living dictates that they may need to make 50. And so as market conditions have really shown us that, you can't pay what you used to pay, you're getting fewer people to do the job of a newsroom of, say, 200 people at one point that is now 17. And so you find yourself covering 5 beats that would have been done by 5 different people. And that's the negotiation that you make. And in nonprofit news, it's a little bit different because we're having conversations about what to pay people. At the Marshall Project, we're being transparent about what those ranges are. And we're still up against other organizations that either pay more or in some way, shape, or form, are giving in a different way. I think, one, that compensation conversation needs to go beyond salary, because I think about what we offer outside of just the pay that you get, and it makes it much more beneficial and fruitful. And, there's opportunity, but there's also, again, the competition of, benefits the 401k matches, the healthcare coverage, so on and so forth. It's tough. But again, I think it's why we've been very intentional about who we bring into the Marshall Project, because this isn't a one and done operation for us. We want people, and a lot of print people, if anybody's in the room, we used to talk about destination newsrooms. And for me, I want this to be a destination outlet for a lot of people, because this is not only something you should grow into, but it's also something that you should see as, a part of your life and not just a stepping stone to a better opportunity. This should be the opportunity.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Marcia Egbert with the Gund Foundation, and I'm always lucky to get to say that, but extra so today because I can respond to your question, Dan, about how a local funder feels about being able to support this work, and we're so privileged to be able to support at the intersection of justice and democracy, and there are so few organizations that can do that or do it as effectively as the Marshall Project, so we feel really grateful that you're here. My question is around where you see yourself now 3 years in on the advocacy spectrum. You talked about the incredible work around driver's license suspensions that was then taken up by a coalition, statewide coalition, that moved that through to legislative action and now law, and the impact it'll have on so many people, not just here, but around Ohio. So how do you navigate, or how do you see yourselves along that advocacy spectrum as journalists?
Well, thanks for the question, and thanks to our funders at Gund, Fred Cummings, folks at Nord, and the Fowler Foundation. Without the support of those foundations, we would not be here in Cleveland. So thank you so much for that opportunity. I think I would love for the Marshall Project to continue spreading its work across the nation, to have more local newsrooms, because of the impact that you can really have on local cities. The need is there. The criminal justice system will never be perfect. It will, but we can certainly strive toward that. And I think that through the efforts, the collaboration of not only of our readers, but the members of our community, but also to the founders funders who support our work. That's what's most encouraging, is that we have this collaboration, and I'd like to see it continue. I'd like to see it grow, and strive toward a more fair and equitable system for everybody.
I don't see us on that advocacy line, just because it's totally different. It's easy to misconstrue the work that we do in advocacy work, but I think at the end of the day, for us, we're writing stories about issues that seem to be talked about around the community and from different people. I love the fact that the conversation that we've had today and the questions that we've heard have kind of sparked in me conversations that I'm going to go into the Cleveland team meeting next week and say, hey, I love the idea of the power of the pen and really placing it in front of people and talking more about the deficiencies that we are seeing when it comes to access to records. I think the impact that we've had in a city and community like Cleveland can make it look like, but all of that was luck, or not luck, but let me say, we didn't intend for the impact that we've received. It's not expected, but it's lovely when it happens. You really don't know what somebody's going to do with the work that you put out there. But for me, I think that's the biggest joy in my career as a journalist, when you write something and somebody takes issue and interest and turns it into something fruitful.
Go ahead, our last question.
Hello, my name is Celeste Cox. I'm with a small nonprofit called MotoGo, but I come from an education background, so not a law background. But I've worked with many, many students who have been just as impacted, and currently at MotoGo we also work with just as impacted youth. And my question to you is, there's a lot of judgment around young people who have been impacted by youth, especially if you don't come from a family that has anyone, who's been impacted, or who's wearing an ankle monitor, or who's missing school to go to a court, and the judge doesn't even show up. So when exploring areas or stories with response to justice-impacted youth, what is the level of collaboration that you guys are finding within the Cuyahoga Community juvenile justice court system?
The amount of collaboration between
what you guys might want to talk about or write about, and the judges that are in the juvenile justice court system, or the clerks or the probation officers. Do people want to talk or share information with you guys, or is it another issue where information is being withheld or hidden?
I would say that my reporters would come back and say that it's a challenge to get access to court records. It's a challenge to even have a sit down with a judge. We've done a lot of stories, and you can go back and read them, and you will see that judges will say that, we'll write that, the judges could not be reached for comment or declined to comment, et cetera. So, yeah, the access there, we're viewed sometimes as an adversary, but, we're there to be the public's checks and balance, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you so much. Phil Trexler, Mark Puente, Marlon Walker of the Marshall Project, all thank you. Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like you, and including many of you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech at cityclub.org. Our forum today is also part of our criminal justice series, which we present in partnership with the Shar and Chuck Fowler Family Foundation. Many thanks to our community partners today at Cleveland State University College of Law, the George Gund Foundation, and Towards Employment. And in addition to those great organizations, we want to welcome guests of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. Tomorrow, August 8th, we present a forum with Anita Zaidi. She's president for gender equality at the Gates Foundation, which just announced a $2.5 billion investment in women's health. She'll be discussing that work with Selena Kunanan, Chief Health Impact Officer at University Hospitals. Also, recently announced a whole series of exciting events with the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. That's September 19th and 20th. Please check it out. It's all part of Cleveland Book Fest, which is sort of all of September. And we hope you'll participate. Hope to see you at many of those. That brings us to the end of our forum. Thank you once again to our panelists. Thank you, members and friends of the City Club. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
The ideas expressed in City Club forums are those of the speakers and not of the City Club of Cleveland, IdeaStream Public Media, or their sponsors. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream Public Media are made possible by PNC and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.